announcements, and I just want to welcome you all to this celebration of life for Nick Luchetti. I'm sure the family is touched by all of you being here. I was gonna open us, get us started.
Figured I'd know somebody here. Okay.
Oh my goodness, thank you. The family wanted me to read this passage from Ecclesiastes, and some of you may recognize this. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek, and a time to lose. A time to keep, and a time to cast away. A time to tear, and a time to sow. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. Would you pray with me? Gracious God, we all come here together to thank you for the life of Nick. God, we thank you for the music, the joy, the teaching, the leading, the life that he has given to so many. God, I ask your peace and your comfort be over everyone here, that they would know that they are dearly loved by you. God, thank you so much for this amazing life and the music that it gives, that goes on and on and on. God, in your name, amen.
Hello. This quote is from Helen Keller. What we have once enjoyed, we can never lose. All that we deeply love becomes a part of us. This is a poem from my grandpa. No tears in heaven. There are no tears in heaven, nor grief of any kind. I leave this final teardrop to those I've left behind. Though absent from the body, I'm present with the Lord. The joy of my salvation is now my full reward. And just as God has promised, he's wiped my tears away, and nothing can compare to the wonder of that day. So keep me in your memory and know that up above, there are no tears in heaven. Instead, there is only love.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dexter Knight, and I am Nick's grandson. Many of you know my grandpa by Nick, Mr. Luchetti, or Duck, his childhood nickname given to him because we would spend most of his days swimming in the Delaware River. But for my sisters and I, we simply called him Grandpa. I remember my first drum lesson when I was younger with my grandpa. I must have been 10 or 11 years old. I was so pumped to just get in the studio and just jam with him. I had visions of being a rock star, getting all the ladies, and just living that rocker lifestyle. Then my first lesson took place. My grandpa quickly knocked me back into reality as he explained the fundamentals of percussion. He'd go on and on what a rudiment was and the importance of the paradiddle. And needless to say, as a young kid who hated practice, my lessons were short-lived. Fast forward to my mid-20s when I got that itch to start playing again. I I asked my grandpa if he'd be willing to take me on as a student. And with no hesitation, he said yes. We were both so excited, and I remember thinking how cool, I get a jam with my grandpa, we're gonna start a band, this is gonna be so much fun. But I guess too much time had passed between those first lessons because that was not at all how it went down. I roll up to my first adult lesson at Mom's music shop, and my grandpa tells me, "You remember the paradiddle?" After several months of practice and actually taking my lesson serious, we finally started to jam out. My grandpa loved jazz, but he could play to anything. I would bring in some of my favorite hip-hop albums, and my grandpa could just sit back and listen for a second, pick up the beat, and just play. That always fascinated me. He would not judge the music or care about the lyrics. He just appreciated the art and loved sharing his talent with anyone who had his same passion. At times I actually think he liked my music. Maybe he was just too nice to say anything different. But I was always so impressed at my grandpa's ability to be able to listen and then play with no flaws whatsoever. Those days in the studio with him are some of my best memories that I will never forget. My grandpa didn't care who you were or what you listened to or what your name was. Like it even mattered. He was going to call you whatever name you wanted. He would spout out a list of 20 names before settling on one that he thought sounded okay. But one thing was for sure, he would love you even if he didn't know you. I will remember my grandpa for the great man that he was, always smiling, always laughing, always accepting. He lived an incredible life, and I'm grateful that I had him in mind for 34 years. And I'm so proud to say that my grandpa was Nick Luchetti. I love you, Grandpa.
Unforgettable, that's what you are. Unforgettable, though near or far. Like a song of love that clings to me, how the thought of you does things to me never before. Has someone been more unforgettable? In every way, and forevermore, that's how you'll stay. That's why, darling, it's incredible that someone so unforgettable thinks that I am unforgettable too.
Hello, everyone. Hi. And thank you all so much for being here. I'm Nick's daughter, Yolanda. Thanks for coming to help celebrate the life of my dad, Nick Luchetti. He obviously touched a lot of people, and he would be very pleased that you're all here. My dad was born in Pennsylvania in 1931 to Italian immigrants, Elvira and Andrea Luchetti. My grandpa was in the Italian Navy and decided to move his family to the U.S. The town where my dad grew up was a little Italian village called Martin's Creek, but my dad always referred to it as Martin's Creek. The town still exists today with a whopping 600 plus population, including some of my dad's distant relatives. His given name was Dominique Pietro Miguel Luchetti, and he always loved letting those names roll off his tongue. No one could say it like he did. His dad worked in the cement mill, and his mom and he raised 4 kids. My dad was the baby. He had 2 sisters and a brother, Yolanda, Mary, and Umberto. He looked up to his older brother, both literally and figuratively, his brother being over 6 feet, and my dad topping out at 5'4" and a quarter. My dad would always say, and don't forget that quarter. Not only was his brother tall, he was a pilot in the Air Force in World War II. Whenever a plane flew overhead, my dad would point to the sky and say, "There goes my brother." The family made their own wine, had a garden, and some animals. His dad was also the village butcher. When I asked my dad if he ever saw his dad butcher a pig, he answered, without missing a beat, "I was holding the tail." He talked of things like stuffing the pig's intestines and hanging them up in the attic to make sausage, and eating fried blood. Luckily, I was never offered that as a kid. The family spoke Italian and later learned English, except for his mom, who died when my dad was still a boy. My family didn't have a lot of money, so when my dad became interested in learning to play the drums, his mom would secretly take money out from the grocery fund and send him into town to take lessons. In addition to his love of music, he loved to be in the water. Being close to the Delaware River was a perfect place for my dad to swim and play with the neighborhood kids. He practically lived in the water, and that's how he got his nickname, Duck, as my son has already told you. After high school, my dad joined the Air Force and played the drums in the Air Force Band. What a great way to serve. He completed his basic training in a small town in New Mexico, can't remember which, except that it was in the middle of nowhere. He told me he thought he was part of some covert government experiment with him being the guinea pig. He'd never seen a tumbleweed or a place so vast with so much dirt or trees so few and far between. Coming from Pennsylvania near the water and not far from the Poconos Mountains, this strange new place was quite strange indeed. His final post was Kirtland Air Force Base, where he'd play with the Air Force Band for all the dances. It was there that he met my mom, Mary Lee Upchurch, who'd go listen to the band and dance. They married in the mid-50s. He went to college on his GI Bill, starting at UNM, and finished his degree at UCLA. He was always very proud of his bachelor's degree from UCLA in psychology. My sister, Laurie Lee, made him a proud dad in 1959. Our dad continued to play gigs and study the drums with a prominent teacher in LA. I want to say Shelly Man, but I'll say what my dad would always say later in his life when his dementia was creeping in, but don't quote me. After moving back to New Mexico and working for the welfare department as a social worker, it didn't take long for my dad to realize he didn't like his career choice. He hated the system and felt that it wasn't allowing him to really help people, so he quit. He had quite a few different jobs. He even sold Fuller brushes door to door and drove his brother-in-law's ice cream truck. His friend, Paul Minch, had a piano store where my dad taught drums in a tiny little studio. Paul eventually encouraged my dad to open up his own drum shop. In 1965, my dad opened Luchetti Drum and Guitar, located at 820 San Mateo Boulevard Southeast. Visiting my dad with my mom and sister was always so much fun and so exciting when we were kids. Dad would let us bang on anything for 10 minutes. My mom and dad divorced when I was very young, but they remained friends throughout their lives, even after they both remarried, which not only speaks to their kind and loving nature, but also to that of their spouses, Glenn Lovell and Sally Luchetti. We'd have all of our holidays and birthdays together. When my sister and I were kids, we'd see my dad on the weekends, and we always did some sort of fun activity. We'd go bowling or swimming or inner tubing in the mountains in the winter and picnics in the summer. We'd play miniature golf, take a walk, or go to a movie. I'll never forget when my dad took me to see The Champ. It was a tearjerker, and I remember looking over and seeing my dad that he was crying too. I thought it was cool that my dad was sensitive and not afraid to cry. My dad's compassion and willingness to help others was next to none. He even volunteered to lead a group of people for the fundraiser Hands Across America in 1986. He picked the place in New Mexico with the most need. My best friend, Margot, my sister and I, along with our 2 new babies, Sophia and Julian, piled into his van and set out to a very bare spot in the middle of nowhere. My dad continued sharing plenty of activities with his grandkids, including playing mushball on his property in the mountains. He loved to cook and have everyone over for Sunday family dinners. My dad liked to stay active, and lazy was not a part of his vocabulary. He'd always say, "Stop talking about it and let's do it." My dad was a very accomplished drummer. He loved to play, and he also loved to practice, which is probably one of the reasons he was so good. He played with lots of bands and was even hired by the likes of Mel Torme and Glenn Campbell, to name a few. My dad's business kept growing, and he moved to a larger location in the 70s. I'm convinced the main reason his store was so well loved was because of my dad. His enthusiasm for playing, teaching, and encouraging young musicians was a big part of who he was. He also loved the camaraderie of his staff, the music teachers, and the entire music community. And he was very generous. He'd lend an instrument to someone he'd just met, or let a high school kid work off their first drum set in lieu of wages. He brought in professional musicians from all over the country to lead the drum clinics at no charge to his customers. He'd cook and give away hot dogs for his parking lot sales. He also had store credit, which I learned while working for him in high school was just him trusting people to pay him every month. Didn't always work out as planned, but that didn't keep my dad from offering it. He'd visit high schools in the morning and be in the clubs at night, whether he was playing or just coming to support a friend or a student. He taught some pretty famous musicians, like then locals Randy Castillo of Ozzy Osbourne and Motley Crue, and Jay Shellen of Badfinger, and Yes. But he never boasted about it or took any credit for their talent. He considered Randy just one of his many beloved musician friends. My sister and I enjoyed some perks of our dad owning a successful music store. We got free tickets to concerts, and he even asked my friends and I to usher for the Buddy Rich concert. After my dad retired from Luchetti Music, he was pretty bored, so he continued to teach until his early 80s. After all, this was a man who built his own home in the mountains with his grandson, Sean, at the age of 59. After a horrific family tragedy, my dad volunteered to raise his grandson and be the father Sean never had. He was there for me too. When I was 19 and 6 months pregnant and suddenly facing becoming a single mom, my dad volunteered to be my Lamaze coach. And he never showed any disappointment when the breathing exercise we practiced with the class proved ineffective for me, and I begged for the nice doctor with the big needle. In 2012, my dad was diagnosed with dementia. Although his memory was progressively taken away from him, his love for and ability to play music never, ever disappeared. I'm so glad he was awarded the Eric Larson Lifetime Achievement Award in 2016 by the New Mexico Music Awards while he was still alive and his mind was still able to enjoy it. There's a picture over there with him holding it. But even as his dementia worsened, his sense of humor and love for being alive and being around people only got stronger. I remember my dad telling his son-in-law during one of our family dinners that he'd gotten lost while driving. He said it was scary, but exciting. He was always upbeat and happy. When asked how he was, he'd say, "For an old man, I'm doing fine." He loved to talk to people and flirt with everyone. We'd take him out to eat, and it would take quite a while to get to the table. He'd point to a gentleman and say with a straight face, "There's my hat," before cracking a smile, and address all the women by saying, "Hello, beautiful lady." He loved to ask people where they were from and try to recruit them to play with him in the shrine band. He'd start a conversation and then clap his hands and say, "I'm 105. Not quite yet. He was a little off. He always loved to be outside, loved to walk and notice the beautiful sky, the gorgeous mountains, or a tree in bloom. I remember when he could still use the phone, and he'd call me and say, "Hey, are you seeing this beautiful sunset?" My dad was a wonderful dad, teacher, mentor, musician, and friend. And he loved being a part of this wonderful world. I'll leave you with something my dad would always say. I love you. Have a great life.
That was wonderful. We'd like for everyone to sing along on this song, and the words are on the back of the program. Let's raise our voices to this fabulous man. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and for you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day and the dark sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people walking by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, "How do you do?" They're really saying, "I love you." I hear babies cry. I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Man, that's a lot of love right out there for Nick. And it's certainly a reflection of all the love that Nick gave to us all. And my name's Dave Bliss. I'm truly honored to stand here before you and speak about Nick, play a favorite song or two of his, and I'll try and keep my words short and sweet, just like Nick. Yeah, I had the good fortune and the chore of playing music with Nick once or twice a week for the last 25 years with the Shriners. You know, Nick was proud to be a Shriner, you know, contributing to the Children's Hospital, to those charities, you know, and in remembrance of Nick, you know, the Shrine of John Dunkel, a place to read here somewhere, I don't see it, but yeah, Nick was very proud to be a Shriner and liked doing that. I know that when I'd come to practice, you know, Nick would be there and he would have walked that day. He liked to walk. I'd always ask him, hey Nick, what rocks did you pick up? And he'd always have a new rock in his pocket that he picked up on the walk. Yeah. But man, 25 years. What happened? Where'd it go? Time just marches along. It's incessant. It's inevitable. Resisting time is futile. And we're all going to be assimilated. So in remembering Nick, my thoughts tend to return to the two subjects he loved, music and time. And love. I guess that's three, but time and love. So, you know, Nick really loved music. You know, and time, that's the canvas that music is painted on. And as musicians, you know, we break it up into rhythms, we call them beats, we harmonize it with frequencies that rhyme, we call them chord progressions, and we weave melodies into that fabric of time to tell a story, whether it has lyrics or not. And Nick was a great keeper of time. And by a great keeper of time, I don't mean he was, you know, metronomically steady or a creator of, you know, clever beats, which he was. But more importantly, you know, as a great keeper of time, Nick infused time with an impish love. And it didn't matter if the time had music in it or not. Nick's time had love. So some of my favorite memories with Nick, besides rocks, are riding along in the parade trailer with Nick, laying into some street beats between songs. You know, he'd do 4/4, a little cut time, a little 6/8, throw in a waltz. And he would just float between time signatures, entertaining us all. And then the next song would start. And drummer never gets a break. Never. Didn't matter. You know, Nick's arm, even into his 80s, his arms didn't seem to tire. I guess that's what good technique will do for you. So, another memory of Nick, and Bruce will appreciate this one, because Bruce drove Nick around a lot to Shriners functions, and I remember this one vividly. Nick could work a crowd at the state fair better than any politician I've ever seen. Yeah, you know, the governor could have learned something from Nick. His primary targets were toddlers and babies and strollers. Nick loved kids. He charmed the parents, perfect strangers. They'd let him come up. He'd make those babies smile with his attention. Bruce and I would, you know, wander around behind him, impressed, zigzagging from stroller to stroller. And at some point we realized, oh my God, Nick, we've got a gig to get to. The stage is that way, back there. So that was Nick. So, the chore that I had with Nick was I sat closest to him for a long time, and Nick had trouble keeping track of his music, his charts. And so even though he was a great keeper of beats, he was a captain of chaos when it came to his charts. I'll tell you what, he could scramble them, and you know, by now anybody who sat next to Nick would make a really good librarian, because he would just have to keep his music in order and find charts for him. But really, he didn't need to use them. So, I'd like to cite a poem here that Bill Biffle, I don't think he's here, pointed me to. And it's included in some Jewish Reform prayer books. And it serves as a meditation before the Kaddish, which is the traditional Jewish prayer of mourning. And I want to thank Bill for this because I'm kind of blown away by how much I feel it fits Nick. You know, as little bits of Nick were stolen away by time, he eventually couldn't recognize his friends or his family. But what was left, and what was always there, was love. You know, the last time I alphabetized Nick's folder, he didn't know who I was, but he genuinely appreciated the assistance. As time crept along, you know, Nick couldn't even recognize or remember his own family, but, you know, each time Yolanda would visit, she'd remind him that he, Nick Luchetti, had a daughter, and each time, Nick couldn't have been happier with this new discovery that he had a daughter, and he was filled with love. So here's the meditation poem, slightly modified by me for Nick, for you all. It's Epitaph, and it's a poem by Merritt Malloy. She wrote it in the 1980s. When I die, give what's left of me away. Give it to children and old men that wait to die. Bernie, you're not waiting. We're still playing. I don't want to hear it. And if you need to cry, cry. But cry for your brother walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give them what you need to give me. I want to leave you something better than words, sounds, or even music. Look for me in the people I've known or loved, all of you. And if you cannot give me away, at least let me live in your eyes and not in your mind. You can love me best by letting hands touch hands and by letting go of children that need to be free. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away.
story about Nick Luchetti, how I met him and how I started there. I was in a band in Colorado Springs, and some band came through from Aspen and said, we're going to go to Albuquerque. Would you like to come with us? And I said, sure, to come back home, because I've been living in Colorado. And so I came here, we did the audition. Of course, we didn't get the gig, so we didn't have a job. So I was out of work, and so I was looking around for work. I didn't know anybody yet. I was born here, but I grew up in Grants, west of here. So I'm driving to this one place. I was going to go see if I could get a job there doing a washing machine for the Loveless Clinic cafeteria, because I had a wife and 2 kids I had to support, and I wasn't working yet. And I'm driving by on San Mateo, and I look over, and there's these drums in the window. And I went, wow, I said, I got to go see that. So I pulled in there. I walked in. Nick was hanging out, real friendly guy, everything. I bought a pair of sticks. I said, hey, this is a pretty nice place and all that. And all the drum sets were, I was like at home. That was my home, it seemed like. Okay, so I'm just hanging, and Nick gets a phone call, and he's talking. And I was just about to walk out the door, and he puts his hand over the phone and says, hey. And I said, yeah. He says, can you play a bossa nova? I said, yeah. Can you play tonight? Yeah. So I started working at the Four Seasons place, and then that led to a bunch of stuff, and about a year later, I started working with Nick at his store. And that was a wonderful time for me, because we were all drummers there, we were sharing the thing, everybody knew everybody, we would get gigs for other guys, people out of work, take this. Nick was always saying, you can try it out. He was really a kind person, and he helped a whole bunch of us. And he was a great guy, and we've been friends for a long time. So I just wanted to say that. God bless you, Nick Luchetti, and go on, drummers, yeah.
A quotation from Plato. Music gives a soul to the universe, wings to the mind, flight to the imagination, and life to everything. My name is Ed Chavez, and Mr. Luchetti was my father-in-law. There are hundreds of stories I could tell you about Nick. Every time we got together, something funny would happen and a new story would be created. But this one's my favorite. So a bunch of us are out to dinner together. We're at Chili's, and Nick's about 88 at the time. And so Nick and I decided we need to visit the men's room. So we're walking to the men's room, and as we're walking by, Nick's talking to everybody. Hey, how you doing? Hey, there's my hat. You know, hey, beautiful lady. Look at these beautiful ladies. And so we get to the kitchen. And the kitchen is one of those big restaurant kitchens where you can go in the kitchen, and there's the kitchen there, and you see across the hallway to the other end of the dining room. So Nick stops and sees this waitress all the way at the other end of the dining room. And he waves, and she turns around and she waves back. And Nick, in his most boisterous voice, says, "Where the hell have you been?" And when it happened, the kitchen just stopped. It's like in the movies where everyone just stops for a moment. And so she runs across the kitchen and puts her arms around Nick and says, "Hey," he says, "well," she says, "I just had to come over here and see your sexy jacket." And without missing a beat, Nick says, "Well, it's on my sexy body." Nick was so kind and so giving and so loving and so selfless and so funny. Nick was one of the funniest men I've ever met in my life. He was just hysterical. But he always made you feel like you were truly loved, like he really, truly loved you. When I asked Nick for permission to marry his daughter, Yolanda, Yolanda said, "Yeah, Dad, and when you do, Ed will be your son-in-law." And Nick said, "He'll be my son!" And that to me was just amazing, because I always thought of Nick as a father. He was like a father to me. He really, truly was. And I will miss him greatly. So Duck, I'm not going to say goodbye to you. Instead, I'm going to say farewell. Because when you say goodbye, you're saying that's it. It's done. No more. But when you say farewell, you're saying sometime, somewhere, someplace down the road, I will see you again. Thank you.
So great to hear all these stories about Nick. How many of you bought your first real book at Luchetti's? You go in like getting something illegal. They need a real book. They bent down to the bottom and pulled it out. It was really fun. What a gem of a man he was. Pack up all my cares and woes, here I go singing low. Bye bye blackbird, where somebody waits for me, sugar sweet, so is he. Bye bye blackbird, no one here can love or understand me. Oh, what hard luck stories they all hand me. So make my bed and light the light. I'll be home late tonight. Blackbird, bye bye. Somebody waits for me, sugar sweet, so is he. Bye bye blackbird, no one here can love or understand me. Oh, what hard luck stories they all hand me. So make my bed and light the light, 'cause I'll be home late tonight. Blackbird, bye bye. Blackbird, bye bye.
Thank you all so much. Can you all thank them again? I thought it was interesting. So there was a little girl in southeastern New Mexico that actually received medical care and testing that she needed from thanks to the Shriners. And that was me. How incredible is that? Yeah. So thank you, Nick. Thank you for all of you who work so hard to take care of people. I'm here walking and standing. How amazing is that? I'm going to close with some of my favorite words. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And that is my prayer for each of you that are mourning and grieving. May you know that comfort is on the wings. It is coming. And as my husband always reminds me and tells me in his loving way, girl, this world is not all there is. So will you please join with me in prayer? Gracious God, into your hands we offer to you Nick. God, we know that you are holding him, and I'm sure you are enjoying some beautiful music. that he is free, his mind is fully free. And he is smiling, knowing that he is being honored for those he has blessed. God, I ask that you comfort those here who are mourning, that they would know, God, that you love them, you will never leave them or forsake them, and that one day we will see you face to face. We ask all of this in your precious name. Amen. May you go in peace and the love of God.
What a day it has been, what a rare mood I'm in. Well, it's almost like being in love. There's a smile on my face for the whole human race. It's almost like being in love. All the music of life seems to be like a bell that is ringing for me. And from the way that I feel when that bell starts to peal, well, I feel like I'm falling. I can tell that I'm falling. It's almost like being in love. What a day this has been. What a rare mood I've been. It's almost like being in love. There's a smile on my face for the whole human race. Well, it's almost like being in love. All the music of life seems to be like a song that is ringing for me. And from the way that I feel when that bell starts to play, well, I swear I am falling.